Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's HALLOWSTEIN video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and since today is literally Halloween, I wanted to bring you something a little bit different. I wanted to tell you about something that I consider to be an actual horror story, dude. It's the story of a family whose life was turned upside down when they became victims of a terrifying stalker who referred to themselves simply as the Watcher. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. They're all BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. So now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. Now this video is on a case that I heard about like years ago on a podcast. Like I've known about it for a while. For the life of me, I can't think of what podcast it is, but I remember listening to it and just being like, damn, dude, like I felt so bad for the family involved here. Their names were the Broaddus's, the Broaddus family, because what they went through sounds like literal hell to me. So in researching this case, I read like a shit ton of articles, as one does. And in doing so, I feel like what I noticed is, in my opinion, the human element in this case has sort of gotten lost in translation. Like, I feel like it gets lost on people that this actually happened to a family with small children. And that like blows my mind, because I cannot imagine somebody threatening my family and my son to the point that I was afraid to live in my own house. It's honestly nightmare fuel, and I feel like, just in general, as a generality here, that stalking cases just aren't really discussed as much as I think they should be and taken as seriously as I think they should be. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. I'm going to be telling you the entire story, and when I am done, once I've given you all the information that there is to have, I want you to answer the question of the day, and that is this. Who do you think was the Watcher of 657 Boulevard, and what do you think their motive was for stalking the Broaddus family? Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the Watcher. Now, I'd like to start this video off with a quote, as I oftentimes do in my videos, and that is a quote from a member of the Broaddus family themselves. That's who we're going to be talking about today. This is a quote from Derek. He was the father. Derek, the father. And he said of his experience in that house and the terror that his family endured, and I quote, "It's like cancer. We think about it every day." Derek and his wife Maria met while in college at the Catholic University of Fairfield in Connecticut. Derek had graduated from high school in Maine, that's where he was from originally, in 1992, before heading off to college and graduating with a bachelor's degree in science marketing, and his wife Maria graduated from high school in New Jersey and then went to college where she worked towards a degree in mathematics and pursuing her master's. After the two met in college, they got married and they decided that they wanted to move to New York, and that ended up being a good move because Derek, the papa, he was a smart guy and he was seemingly good at business, so he was able to quickly climb the corporate ladder, as people do, and ended up becoming the vice president at his company. And Maria was also working herself, and she got a job in human resources and consulting before she moved on to being a teacher of fourth graders. I guess another way you could say that would be a fourth grade teacher, but the way my brain works, you know. Anyways, after a while, they decided that they wanted to expand their couple into like a full-blown family. I couldn't think of the word for 5 people because they go on to have 3 kids. And it's at this point that Maria decides that she wants to take a step back from teaching other people's kids and stay and be an at-home mama for their kids, which arguably is a harder job than being a teacher, because at least with being a teacher, you could send those kids home, and being an at-home mom, those kids are home. I have a newfound respect for like stay-at-home parents now, and just like people with kids in general, because that shit do be hard. Derek and Maria were both smart people. They were academics and they were known as being like good people. Derek had once raised like thousands of dollars for pediatric cancer research. Maria worked at a summer camp for kids with cancer, and at some point she also worked at like a counseling center for abused children. The couple was doing pretty well financially, so they ended up buying their first home, which was a $300,000 home in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, and they stayed there for 6 years before deciding it was time to upgrade, and they wanted to move to like this really nice upper class neighborhood called Westfield, New Jersey, which is where Maria had actually grown up when she was young. In June of 2014, Derek and Maria bought their dream house. Isn't that the way that all these stories begin? The answer is yes. It was a cool, chill, $1.3 million home. So very expensive. And this was actually of the 3 top transactions, I believe in New Jersey, or was it the country? Either in New Jersey or in the country for that year. Like this was it must have been New Jersey, not in the country. LA exists and like every house is $1 million in LA. So the top 3 transactions in New Jersey of the entire year. So it was a very big, expensive house. It was located at 657 Boulevard, which was in Westfield, New Jersey, which was like this really nice, elite place, one of the safest places you could live in America. And it was less than 30 miles away from Manhattan and less than 20 miles away from New York City. This was a big old house. It was built in 1905 and it had 6 bedrooms and sat on close to a half an acre of land. So there was a big old yard and it was really close by to where Maria had grown up, like where she had spent her childhood. So this was like her dream, to be back in her old stomping yards. She must have had a good childhood to want to go back. That's all I can say about that. So this house, I've looked at photos. It's super nice. I gotta be honest though. It reminds me a bit of Amityville. Maybe it's because I'm looking at it through like this spooky lens, but they have like a very similar vibe, very similar silhouette, and all those like windows in the front. And dude, Amityville happened relatively close by. It was only 60 miles east of Westfield where that happened, where Amityville happened, and happened just 40 years earlier. So it was, you know, sort of fresh. 657 Boulevard was like a big colonial style home, so it had a very similar vibe to the Amityville house, except for that it had like this big, bright, open floor plan, and it looked like really nice and pretty inside, and all the photos I saw online, probably because of all those windows. It was like decked out in hardwood floors, which is money. And on top of money, speaking of money, it also had a chimney, or multiple chimneys, because the kids, as soon as they were going to move in, they were deciding which chimney Santa was going to come down at Christmas time. So like lots of chimneys, lots of hardwood floors, lots of windows, money, $1.3 million home. Which, I mean, I guess a fireplace isn't necessarily like money. To me, it kind of feels like money. But I feel like a fireplace is one of those things that's better in theory than in practice, because like as romantic and lovely and just great as it sounds, if you have dry skin, it's not going to be your friend. The couple was super excited to move in, with their babies, their 3 little babies. They weren't little babies. One of them was a little baby, the rest were kids, but they're always your little babies, right? And this was like a really big deal. Buying a home for yourself is like one of the most adult things you can do, right? And it's something that a lot of people can't do, especially in recent times with like how expensive homes are and just the lack of properties available to like individual people to begin with, right? Companies are what's buying up all the properties right now. It was just like a big deal. And Derek had worked super hard at his job, moving his way up in the ranks in the company to make sure that he could provide a really good life for his kids, where they had like a house of their own to grow up in. And it was far enough away from the city that the kids could still go to like nice schools and have like a yard and have that home suburb feel, but close enough that he could commute to work. And I saw it mentioned in like a lot of articles that Derek did all of this, was able to create this wealth for himself before he turned 40, which is something to some people. So I'm mentioning it because it said a lot, but just know, in case you read that, you hear that and you're like, I'm X years old and I haven't done X. There's no timeline on getting shit done, so don't fall into that trap. So the house was bought, everything was going good, but they didn't move in right away because as beautiful as the house was, they wanted to do some renovations, some remodeling before they moved in to make it more their own. But, you know, they still bought it. Derek still had to go to the house. He had to keep up the lawn. He would go and, you know, check things out, see how things were going, probably just admire the home that he just spent over $1 million on and be like, damn, I did that shit. And he would also go and he would check the mail. And checking the mail is exactly where our story begins. On one of the evenings that Derek was at the house, he was doing a little work on the interior, doing a little painting. He decided that he would quickly check the mail while he was there. So he does just that. And amidst the sea of junk mail, you know, advertisements for grocery stores and new pizza places, he found a letter. And this wasn't a normal letter. It was like a big envelope, kind of like one you would see for like a greeting card. And on the outside it said, "To the new owners." And inside he found a typed letter. And this was one of several letters that the Broaddus family would receive while they owned 657 Boulevard. The letter started out nice enough saying, quote, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." Aw, that's so sweet, that's so considerate. Well, it takes a really sharp left turn from there. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. And as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. I see you have already flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. Now this is where I'm going to say that's going to be a no from me, dog, but the Watcher continues. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for your growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me. You're gonna call who? Where, my guy? Like, absolutely not. That's just, no, that's gonna be a no. I can't get over how no that is. The writer then went on to reveal more information about them to show that this person had actually been watching them, as if naming how many children they still have, wasn't enough. They went on to say, like, what kind of car they had and told them that they had noticed the renovations. Like, they are clearly seeing what's going on. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin. And then the letter was simply signed, The Watcher. This first letter was postmarked June 4th, which was before the sale of the house was made public and a day before contractors had arrived. So this letter was sent before anyone should have even known that the sale had gone through and that there were new owners. And besides that, the prior owners didn't even put a sign that said for sale out front. So nobody just driving by or walking by could know that they were even intending to sell the property, let alone that they had sold the property. And on top of that, the work that was being done on the house was mostly done in the interior of the house, and most people who lived in the area said they didn't even hear the commotion going on inside the house. So it wasn't like this was a very obvious thing that just anybody could have seen. This is somebody who was close enough by that they could actually know that these things were happening. So Derek reads this and he's not about it. It's like nighttime when he's reading this. He's just like at the house late at night. He reads this. He's like, oh my God. So he runs inside the house and he calls the cops. The cops come. He gives them the letter. One of them reads it and is like, what the fuck is this? And then they realize that they need to find out who sent this letter because it is vaguely threatening. So the cops ask him, like, first off, they rule out, like, they don't really think it's a joke. It doesn't feel like a joke. It doesn't sound like a joke. So the cops are like, hey, do you have any enemies? Is there anybody who would be, like, pissed off that you bought this house? Like, what's up? What's in your history? And Derek draws a blank. He's like, I can't think of anything or anyone. And the cops are like, well, here's the thing. Sucks to suck, but there's really not much we can do here. We don't know who sent it. You don't know who sent it. Seems like a one-off, but just in case it's not, you might want to move that piece of equipment that's outside the window. There was like a piece of equipment from a contractor outside the window in case the Watcher gets like a hair up his ass to throw it into your window. Like, thanks, dude. Good advice. It actually probably is good advice, but I'd be like, what? So he goes home at this point. He goes to see Maria and he tells her what's going on, and she's not stoked about it. Who would be? They talk about it and they decide the best course of action would be to contact the prior owners, see if they had ever received a letter, see if there was anything weird going on at the house before they bought the house, see if they have any idea who this Watcher could be. The prior couple was an older couple named the Woodses, and they had lived there. They had lived there for a long time. They had raised their kids there. Their kids were adults now. And then they realized, like, this is a pretty big house for just 2 people because, like, their kids had moved out and everything. So they decided to sell the home, give, like, the younger generation an opportunity to buy up property, and they moved to an idyllic waterfront property in another state. Part of the reason they wanted to talk to the Woods also is because the Watcher had actually referenced the Woods in the letter and said that they had instructed the Woodses to send the house, and therefore the Watcher, fresh young blood. And the Broaddus's had 3 small children, so like, that's fucked up. Like, if you did do that, we would like to know, because that's fucked up. So anyways, they reach out to the Woods, send him a little email. They're like, hey, did you lead us here so that you could give the Watcher, like, young blood or not? That's not really what they asked. I'm not sure exactly what they said, but they were basically saying along the lines of, hey, do you know who this is? Could there be somebody who was upset? Do you know who could have been sending these letters? Because they say they've been watching the house since the 20s and then again in the 60s, and you guys lived here for 2 decades. So, like, was there anybody sending you weird letters? Do you have any idea who could be jealous and who was obsessed with this house? Mrs. Woods was the one who ended up emailing back, and she emailed them back and was like, huh, that's the darndest thing. It's funny you ask, because actually I did receive a letter, like, right before we moved out. There was a letter that was sent to us that was signed by somebody named the Watcher, but that wasn't threatening or anything. It was just a little bit weird. And I just assumed it was like a joke or somebody was screwing with us. So I threw it in the trash and didn't think anything of it. So the two women decided to take things into their own hands, Mrs. Woods and Mrs. Broaddus, and they went to the police station because if this wasn't a joke, this was very scary because there were kids involved. And they get there, they both tell the story to the police. It's now the police know that there was another letter prior with the prior owners, and the police are like, okay, we're going to look into it. We're going to figure out who this is and what's going on, but keep it on the hush hush. You don't want to go spreading it around because like anyone living around you, all of your neighbors are possible suspects. Everybody is a suspect, okay? Everybody's a suspect. Your dad's a red herring. It's Billy. So they did just that. They didn't mention what had happened to anybody around, and they were just super, super careful. Like Derek had a work trip that he was planning to go on, but he decided to cancel it so he could stay and be close with his family. Whenever they would go to the house and like do like check out the house, check the mail, do the renovation, do the art, blah, blah, blah. It was their house. They were like going and coming from it all the time, though they hadn't moved in. Maria would be really on top of the kids, and if they wandered too far, like playing in the yard, she would call them back by their names and be like, get back here, like don't go too far. They were careful, but they were going to be living there, so they still had to be friendly, they had to be social, they had to try to make friends, and one set of neighbors, it was a couple, had actually asked if they could get like a tour of the house, see the inside, see all the newness, all the renovations you did. Now me personally, I would have been like, oh fuck no, I wouldn't be trying to make friends with anybody, but that's just me and my personality type, and I just don't make friends with people. But that wasn't how the Broadduses were, so Derek was like, sure, yeah, come on in. So he's showing this couple around the house, they're looking at it, they're like, ooh, ah, that's beautiful, that's great. And then the woman was like, oh, it'll be nice to have some young blood around here. And Derek was like, what the fuck did you just say to me? Like, he didn't say that, but he freaked out. Because I know it's like a saying that people say, but what are the odds that somebody would say specifically that when this is going on? So he was very on edge, as one should be. Now, as the days go by and the family's at the house and they're doing their thing, they're not moved in, obviously, but they're there. Derek keeps checking the mail. And each day he checks it and there's no letter. And he's like, oh, we're getting a little break. Something's not happening. It seems like maybe this was a joke. But also at the same time, it didn't seem like it was a joke because at one time, like a contractor had been there and put a sign out front. And then he came back the next day and it was very clear that somebody had forcibly ripped that sign from the ground and thrown it. So like something was still going on, but they weren't receiving letters. So they're like, what is going on? Maybe this isn't really happening. Maybe things are fine. But they weren't, because 2 weeks after the first letter came in, another letter was received. This letter was found by Maria. She had popped in to do something and quickly checked the mail and found the letter. This one, though, was a bit more formal. It wasn't addressed to the new neighbors. It was addressed to the Broadduses specifically, but their names were spelled the same. Like coffee, just not spelled the same. And this would just simply not be okay with me. None of this would be okay with me. All of this is bad. Welcome to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I've been watching you unload cartfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what's in the walls yet? And this is when I would bounce, right? Like, what's in the walls? What's in my ass, bro? In time they will. I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought me. You certainly say their names often. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far enough away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know, I'll be watching. In this letter, the Watcher had also mentioned them by name, knew Derek's name, knew Maria's name, knew the kids' names, and that's when it goes too far, right? Like, People can have differences of opinion. You obviously look at how differently people think. Two people can look at the exact same thing, have totally different opinions on it, and think that they are right. Okay, when it comes to kids, when it comes to talking about stuff in the walls and young blood and threatening people's kids by name, that's when, if this is a joke, it has gone too far. So then Derek and Maria are racking their brains like, how the does this guy know our kids' names? And they brainstorm and they brainstorm. And the only thing that they figure is that the person was close enough by that they could hear Maria when she would call the kids when they would go too far out into the yard, when she would call them by name. It was at this point that the family, the Broaddus family, decided that they might want to cool it on moving in, right? They might want to take a step back and figure out what they're going to do, because they've been moving in, slowly bringing in some of their belongings, but not all of them. And at this point, they decided that they weren't going to move in just yet. They were going to think through their options and definitely not bring the kids back there for a while. And the Watcher definitely noticed their absence. After a few weeks of the family being absent, a new letter was sent. And this letter was again from the Watcher, and it was the Watcher asking where they'd been, wondering if they were coming back, saying that the house was hurting, 657 Boulevard needed them, and it was in pain and suffering over the renovations that were being done to it, and that the Broadduses were stealing the house's history, saying specifically, and I quote, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you." So this was scary to them. All this was scary to them. And even though the renovations were done and they even had a new security system installed, they didn't feel safe moving in there. They didn't feel confident that they could keep their kids safe. And by this point, it was the end of 2014. They had already sold their previous house. They couldn't live there anymore. So they ended up moving in with Maria's parents nearby, and stayed with them, a whole ass family with her parents, while they figured out what they were going to do. What's super messed up though is that, like, even though they weren't living there, they still owned the house. They still had to pay property taxes on over $1 million home, and they still had to maintain the home. Derek still had to go over and like shovel the driveway and maintain the lawn because of like HOAs and shit. So he would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go over to 657 Boulevard, shovel the driveway, drive back, shovel his in-laws' driveway, and this was taking a toll on him physically. Him and his wife were so stressed out. Like, money is one of the most stressful things that a person can deal with. Like, that's what causes a lot of fights in relationships. And on top of that, moving, that's one of the biggest stressors, I think, next to death. So they weren't doing well. They were stressed. They were fighting. They weren't sleeping. They were really depressed. People who had known them a long time, like longtime friends, were worried they were going to get a divorce. And they were both in therapy because of this. And Maria even got diagnosed by her therapist with PTSD from the situation they were in. Maria said that the letters from the Watcher were giving her nightmares. She said she had a particular nightmare where there was like a man with like some boots and a pitchfork, it sounds like the devil, who was calling to her kids, and they were going to this person and she couldn't get to them in time. She started being super critical. She was staring at everyone's face, like when she'd go and shop at the local Trader Joe's, she was staring at everyone's face to see if anyone was paying too close attention to her or to her kids. Like, this was making her crazy. And then if anyone did seem suspicious, she would go home and then spend hours Googling them. She had a really tough time, as I'm sure you can imagine. I guess there was this one guy, his name was Bill. He was a painter. And he said that she had been super stoked. Like, he didn't know her, obviously, but he was around her. He worked for her. So he said that she was super stoked. They were so excited about the house. Everyone was so excited. And then Maria was now petrified. And at one point, she even, like, hugged him and just broke down crying, like, completely lost her shit over everything that was going on. Meanwhile, police are investigating. They're looking into different leads. They have their theories. And one of the theories that they have is that maybe because this house is a super nice house and like a very coveted neighborhood, like the Boulevard was the Boulevard, you know what I mean? So they thought it was possible that maybe somebody had wanted the house, had made a bid on the house maybe, and didn't get it, so they were pissed. Just like that other video I did. Remember that other video I did on a stalker of this lady who wanted to buy a house and another couple got it, so she started stalking them? If you haven't seen that, you should watch it. It's freaking crazy. They also thought it was possible that it was a neighbor. Obviously, a neighbor makes a lot of sense, right? They thought it was a neighbor who was upset about the renovations that the Broaddus was doing because, like, new money, you don't really want that. Or somebody who just didn't want a neighbor who had little kids, right? They'd gotten used to, like, 2 decades of, like, an older couple, and now all of a sudden you got these little kids running around making noise, yelling. I get it. Before I had kids, I was like, this kid's out of here. Not really, but you know what I mean. Like, it's definitely a different vibe. They also thought like maybe it was a prior housekeeper who had worked at 657 Boulevard, like as help, right? Because these are rich people. And that this person was upset that the Broadduses had bought the house that they wished they could buy. Police even went as far as to look at registered like child abusers, or you know what I mean, like people who do messed up stuff to kids, because in the letter they had referenced young blood and their kids, which fuck that forever. That pisses me off. And it just made the couple like crazy. They were leaning really hard on the neighbor theory, and they were really critical of all their neighbors, and suddenly everything any of their neighbors did was creepy as fuck to them. Like, there was a neighbor who lived behind them, and I guess the neighbor would like bring out lawn chairs and like sit in their lawn and just like sit there and like look out, like people watch, be like a watcher, but not like the watcher. Well, maybe the watcher, we don't know, that's the whole point. But he said that at one point, like, one of the workers had noted that these people were like sitting in their lawn chairs in the yard, and they were facing not their own home, but like the Broaddus home, and watching them. Like, watching them or watching them, you know what I mean? Was that a good sentence? Did any of that make sense? Did any of that make sense? Oh my god. Did any of that make sense? Da, 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 da. Probably not. No. The Broadduses looked at it from all angles, but landed on the neighbor theory, and even the police were looking at it from all angles, and you heard everything they did. And I will say, I wonder if they would have been so vigilant looking into a stalking case, which traditionally isn't taken super seriously, if this wasn't in such a wealthy and elite area. I think the answer is probably no, but you know, it is what it is. So police are looking into it. They're looking into everything, and they start to believe that the theory that somebody had like wanted to buy the house but was outbid or something like that wasn't really likely, because I guess there had only been 2 like serious offers on the house besides the Broaddus offer, which is crazy. Like, well, actually it's not crazy. It was a nice house, but like, it was a fucking expensive house, and who's just got millions on deck ready to just drop it on a house? Not many people. And of these 2 people who had also put an offer on the house, one of them, they had both backed out on their own. One was because they found a new house that they wanted instead and bought that. And the other person had like a health complication and had to back out because they needed to tend to that, and it was more important than a house. In the end, police started to believe what the Broaddus believed, that it was most likely a neighbor who was responsible for the Watcher letters. One, because the letters were sent from Kearney, which was the local post office. And on top of that, the Watcher knew things that they could only really know if they were, 1, actually local, and 2, like walking around the neighborhood or very close by. Things they reported seeing would not be easily seen from the street in a passing car, so they'd actually have to be walking by on foot, which is wild. Just like walking on foot, looking into people's yards and not being noticed, which is crazy because they were really, really on alert and trying to notice if any specific person or specific car were paying too close attention to the house. Too close of attention to the house. They were really vigilant and paying attention. They didn't see anybody, but it made the most sense that it had to be somebody very close by, or how else could they have seen the things that they've seen? Does that make sense? All my videos lately, I feel like I don't make any sense. Now, the neighbor theory, the one that the Broaddus was so hung up on. They actually had somebody that they thought was a good suspect, somebody that they actually ended up really thinking was responsible for sending the letters. This was somebody who was seen as being a bit of a weirder guy in the neighborhood, somebody who was just known for being a bit eccentric. This was an older man who lived with his mother. Like, his mother was an older woman, obviously, and I think she owned the home. Her name was Peggy, and her son was in his 60s, and his name was Michael. Now, I guess other kids of Peggy's lived there too, like other siblings of Michael's, but Michael was the one that people found to be strange. Now, the thing about Michael, though, is he was diagnosed as schizophrenic, and schizophrenia is one of those things that if you don't really, like, 1, know they have it, or 2, know what the symptoms are, it could seem weird, right? And he could make people a little bit uncomfortable if they don't know what they're looking at. And I guess he did things that made people uncomfortable. He would, like, walk through people's yards and look into their windows. And people who actually knew Michael, people who were close with Michael, said that he might have been strange, but that he was kind, that he was the type of person who would go and pick up your newspaper for you and bring it home every day. Like, he wasn't doing weird things that were like aggressive or violent. Like, strange but harmless is the way that he was described. But here is the thing. He lived right next door to the Broadduses, which would have given him a perfect view into their home, a perfect view into areas like the patio that couldn't be seen from the street, that the Watcher had proven that he or she had seen. His family had also lived there since the 60s, which would show that they had been there long enough to be the Watchers. There were just several things that really made the Broadduses like cling to him as soon as they learned that he existed, basically. Strange older guy, lives next door, can see and hear what's going on, right? He could hear the contractors calling Derek and Maria by their names, hear Maria calling the kids by their names. He was a bit odd, right? Made people uncomfortable. Also, his dad had just died like 12 years earlier, which kind of lined up with the passing of the torch to him being the Watcher now. But at the same time, people who knew him were like, he could not possibly be the person writing those letters. But for the Broadduses, this just made sense that this was their guy. He seemed strange. He lived right next door. He'd be able to take in all the information that the Watcher had and do it in a discreet way. He'd be able to go over and rip signs out of the yard, right? Nobody would see, and he wouldn't stick out in the neighborhood because he was from the neighborhood. So that was their thought process. Now, it turns out that police agreed, at least agreed that he seemed like a good suspect and somebody worth talking to, because when the Broadduses brought it to the police's attention, they were like, oh yeah, we've already talked to him. They had already brought him in and questioned him, which, can you imagine how weird that conversation would be if it wasn't you? It's not a good look. This whole thing, can you imagine living there after all this goes down? Absolutely not. It sounds so embarrassing, but they talked to him, and they didn't believe that it was him after speaking to him. For whatever reason, they just didn't think that he was a likely suspect, and they definitely didn't think it was him because after they had spoken to him, more letters came, and they were like, that'd be fucking dumb for us to question him and put heat on him and then him to continue doing it. That just doesn't seem very likely. And after, a prolonged investigation, however long and extensive it was, they told the Broadduses that, short of an admission, there wasn't much more they could do to try to figure out who this was or put a stop to it. Police told Derek that they believed it was probably safe, that it was probably just somebody who was saying things all talk, no action. And Derek said of this, and I quote, "This is someone who threatened my kids, and police are saying probably nothing's going to happen, probably isn't good enough for me. This person attacked my family, and where I'm from, if you do that, you get your ass beat." Which I'm like, Derek. I guess police brought this family, not even just Michael, they brought in the whole family that lived there, more than once, I think twice they were brought in and questioned. And they were like, listen, you live right next door. You can clearly see or watch everything that's going on. They showed him the letters. They're like, what gives? And I guess his sister got super pissed off and was like, listen, you're harassing us. The Broadduses are harassing us. We're not sending any stupid letters to these stupid people about their stupid house. And you need to stop. And I can't imagine how it would feel to be them if they were not involved, because I don't know who's involved. I have no idea who did this. Spoiler alert, it's unsolved to this day, baby. But the thing is if they didn't do it, I would feel this way too. And I guess the Broadduses were even going to go as far as filing a lawsuit against these people, but the police were like, we have ruled them out. You can't do that. And another reason, I didn't even say this, another reason that they ruled out Michael as being the sender of the Watcher letters is because they had taken DNA off the letters, off the envelope, and the DNA, when they ran it, came back as belonging to a woman. So Michael, not being a woman, didn't seem like a likely suspect for them anymore. So when they got that DNA, by the way, they ran it against Maria, and they ran it against Mrs. Woods, the prior owner, and neither of them were a match. So they're like, okay, it's none of you. It's not Michael. Maybe it could be Michael's mom, I guess, but she's pretty fucking old. Not that old people can't do things, but it seems just beneath her and below her to bother. You know what I mean? I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me. But Michael did have a sister, okay? And so they were like, I wonder, his sister's name was Abby. And they're wondering if maybe Abby could be the letter writer, because they thought it's possible that she had a motive to do so, because Abby was a real estate agent. And the Woodses hadn't used her as their real estate agent when they sold the house, so maybe she had an axe to grind, but with the new owners and not the Woodses. So Maria and Derek really wanted to find out who the author was of these letters, if I haven't illustrated that through this entire video, right? So they went as far as hiring one PI and 2 retired FBI agents, one of which, by the way, was the inspiration, this person was the inspiration for Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, which I didn't even know that she was based on a real FBI agent, but apparently she was. And this FBI agent was hired by the Broadduses. And these 3, I don't know if they were working together or who was doing what thing, but basically they were tasked with kind of following the neighbors and trying to see what they could find out. They followed Michael and Abby, and they tried to wait and see if they could get their DNA, right? If they could, because they need to test it, right? Against the letter and see. So they follow Abby around for a while, and she discards, what a word. She throws away a water bottle. What a word. It's discards, it's a big word. But she throws away a water bottle, and they get it, and they test it, and it is not a match for the Watcher letters. Now, despite everyone basically telling them, it's not this family, for whatever reason, they've got their reasons. They know more than we know. We weren't there. The Broadduses really thought it was, and they're like, listen, with all due respect, and remember, I'm saying, with all due respect, that idea that you're saying that it's not them isn't worth a velvet painting of a whale and a dolphin getting it on. So they decided to take things into their own hands. Derek had put up cameras at the house to kind of watch the comings and the goings, right? Obviously, step 1, that's what you would do. You want to see who's coming near your house, set up cameras to record who's coming near your house. So that's one thing. He would then go and he'd stay at the house and he would sit there in the dark and like watch people come and go. He'd watch the neighbors. The watched had become the watcher, sort of. He mapped out the neighborhoods and watched and took note of when people moved in, like new families came into the neighborhood, keeping a close eye on who came, who went, what cars were driving by. Even Maria was like, listen, you're being a little crazy, my guy. I mean, Derek went as far as hiring a priest to bless the house. But I think about it and I'm like, what would you be willing to do? How far would you go if you felt like your family was in danger? And like how hard would that stress affect your brain? You know what I mean? And like your logic and the things that you're doing. I can't imagine. He would go to the house. He would sit in the dark. He would hold on to a knife and he would sit and watch the streets to see if anybody was hanging out by their house too long, lingering, if you will. And then went as far as sending a letter himself to the neighbor's house, right? To Michael's house. Letting them know that they were planning, because they were neighbors, to tear down the house and just like use the lot, because he's like thinking, well, hey, if it's them and they're the watchers and they're so into this house, they'll be very upset that I'm saying that I'm going to do this, and maybe like elicit some sort of response from the watcher. But nothing happened. For the record, I think it's important to note this family has aggressively denied any involvement, and there's no evidence that actually links them to this case. They're just like the main theory because of how hard the Broadduses believed that it was them, and they've said that it wasn't them. Michael denied being involved until he died in 2020, and despite being cleared by police, his family is pissed, and one of his relatives said of their involvement in this case, and I quote, "It fucking never ends. I'm his brother. I own the goddamn house. We got accused of doing something that we didn't do. Did we ever get a fucking apology from the police?" So moving on, these letters were looked at, right? And one of the FBI agents that the Broadduses hired actually created a criminal profile of who they thought could have written the letters based on what the letters said and like the language used. They were able to determine that the person who wrote the letter was a reader because of the vocabulary and sentence structure that they used, and that it was likely someone older because of the way they addressed the letters, the spacing. I think it was double space, like elderly folk used to do on typewriters back in the day, and the mention of the weather. They would always talk about the weather in the letters, which is like traditionally an older person thing to do. They also believe that even though the letters were relatively polite, like not outwardly aggressive, they did include underlying threats, that clearly the letter writer had rage bubbling below the surface. This person seemed to have an issue with people with money as a whole, seemingly upset by, quote, new money moving into town. And this person clearly had some issues, like this person's cheese had slid off their cracker. That's my second Green Mile reference in this video. I need to watch the Green Mile. But anyways, they believed that the person, though all those things were true, they probably were all talk and no action. But if someone's cheese has slid off their cracker, can you really trust that they're going to stop at just sending letters? Like, can you really confidently trust that? I don't know if I could. And considering this person, who's not violent, is saying things like, quote, 657 Boulevard is turning on me. It's coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it is my enemy. I am in charge of 657 Boulevard. It is not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring the young blood back to me. 657 Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in 657 Boulevard. Stop changing it and let it alone. I find that to be very concerning. I would find that to be very concerning. I wouldn't be able to just be like, oh, it's a joke. Oh, they're mad, but they're not violent. I wouldn't be able to feel that way. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night in that house. And the Broadduses agreed they could not feel safe in that house. They had considered moving in. They considered like getting a trained German Shepherd or they put up like an ad for like a vet, like a big buff, like a veteran to come and just work out in their yard so that anybody nearby would think they had like a bodyguard. But in the end, they just decided like, listen, we can't move in here. It sucks. It really does. This was it. This was the dream. This would have been perfect. This would have been great, but we can't do it. And we just need to put it back on the market. Can you imagine the disappointment and stress in something like that? To go through all the stress of just buying the house in general. That's a stressful thing. To move, sell your old house, and then this happens. And then you have to just give up your dream home. They never lived a day in that house. It's so messed up, man. And now they're going to sell. And it's not going to be an easy sell because by now, the word has gotten out. Everyone knows what's going on. Everyone knows about the letters. Everyone knows about the stalking because that's what this is. Stalking, by definition, is a pattern of unwanted behavior directed at a specific person which causes that person to change their routine or feel afraid, nervous, or in danger. That sounds exactly like what they're going through. On top of that, even though it wasn't legally required in New Jersey, they decided to disclose everything. Anybody who made an offer on the house, they would give like a general disclosure about it, like nothing that was too obvious, but they were like, we want to let you know something's going on. And then if anybody was making like a serious offer, they're like, okay, this is what we want. They're like, okay, here's copies of the letters. So let's see if you still want that. And people were like, well, shit, no, I don't. Like, I don't want to fucking deal with that. That sounds like hell. So they had a lot of trouble selling the house. This is like a nice thing for them to do, right? It's nice of them to do this. But because of it, they weren't able to sell the house. When they initially like put it on the market, they put it for higher than they had paid for it because they put all these renovations into it, but they kept lowering it and lowering it and lowering it. And even when they had it as like a steal of a price, people were still like, this is them reading the letters, by the way. No, thank you. This is a lot of money to end up in the situation you're in right now. So after a year of owning this house, going through all this shit, then trying to sell it and not being able to, they start thinking like, damn, we really are in like a huge fucking hole now. And it's kind of fucked up that we're doing the right thing by disclosing, but the Woods didn't give us the same courtesy. Like, would we have moved in here if they had told us about the letter that they got? Probably not. So they decided to sue the former owners. The complaint was filed in 2015, and it essentially said that the previous owners had sold them the house with knowledge of the letters and therefore put the family in danger. They were suing for legal costs and punitive damages for, quote, severe and incalculable emotional distress, end quote. Basically, they were wanting the whole $1.35 million they spent, plus hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional monies. In the end, though, the judge wasn't down with their sickness and dismissed their case, basically saying that he didn't want to burden future sellers with what they did and did not have to disclose. And then, in response to their lawsuit, the Woodses, the prior owners, sued the Broadduses for defamation of character. But I didn't actually see how that one turned out. It's not really my business. I don't know if I think it's very likely that the Woods purposely screwed them into this situation. They seemed like a nice old couple. They were an older couple, and they were well respected in their community, you know. Mr. Woods was a cell biologist with a PhD in biology, and like the Broadduses, he worked closely with those suffering from cancer. He and his wife, Andrea, who also worked in medicine, she was working for a pharmaceutical company making vaccines, and the two were just members of the church, and Mr. Woods, even served as a deacon. So I don't know, something about it, they just don't seem like the type to me. But you know what, you never do know anybody, right? If this channel tells you something, anything, is that you don't really know anything about anybody. So from there, since they couldn't move into the home, well, they didn't want to move into the home, they couldn't sue, and they couldn't sell, they decided that they would try to rent the home. But again, this wasn't super successful because everybody knew about the situation at the house. Derek even looked into renting the home to the Department of Veterans Affairs and also a company that runs halfway homes. But at first, renting the place was unsuccessful. This case ended up getting national attention, and their neighbors were super pissed off about it. They didn't like the negative attention. They were really worried that their property values were going to go down, and this was one of the wealthiest places and one of the safest places you could live. So they're like, could you please take your drama fucking elsewhere? Thank you. Newcomers, get out of here. They were so worried about their property values and also the overall aesthetics of the street that when the Broadduses, they decided okay, here's what we'll do. We'll sell the land to a developer, and this person can tear down the house and put two smaller houses on the same lot, and then double the pleasure, double the fun. The neighborhood was absolutely fucking not. No, you won't. Who gives you the right? I mean, I own the place, but who gives you the right? And this was the type of neighborhood where you had to get permission from the town council or shit like that. So they had a whole ass meeting about this where they could make a decision on whether or not the Broadduses could do what they wanted with their own space. I don't know. I don't own a home. That whole situation, that whole type of thing seems so weird to me. So many people spoke out at this meeting against the Broadduses' plan. One person even hired an attorney to speak for them. They were really against it. They didn't want trees being knocked down or, quote, unesthetically pleasing, ugly front-facing garages is basically what they were saying. One neighbor even said, quote, "Our neighborhoods are constantly under attack from turf, lights, parking decks, you name it. If we can't make a stand on the boulevard, where can we?" Ma'am. And during this meeting, one of the people who spoke was actually Abby, Michael's sister. Remember the family that was under suspicion that we stopped talking about a while ago? Well, Abby spoke, and she's like, listen, I've lived there for years, and I don't want to look out and see an ugly old driveway. I want to look out and see this big, beautiful house that I've looked at for years. And in the end, the board unanimously rejected the proposal. They were like, no, you can't do it. And the Broadduses tried to appeal, and that was rejected also. The neighbors, according to the Broadduses, made the whole situation so much worse for them, which is really sad. But it sounds like that's the type of thing that could definitely happen. Because, you know, people do be gossiping. And what do you think they were gossiping about? What do you think they were saying? They were like, listen, I'm not the watcher. I know you're not the watcher. And come to think of it, none of these problems even started until those people moved in. Maybe they're making it all up. The people thought that maybe this was a scam regarding the house, or that they had like serious buyer's remorse, or that they were just trying to like drum up media sensation so that they could get some sort of movie deal out of it. But the Broadduses like always denied interviews for like the longest time. They denied interviews, and they even sent a cease and desist letter to Lifetime, because Lifetime, the network, tried to make either a movie or a series. I think it was a movie about the situation. They sent a cease and desist letter like, listen, this is my life, like stop. But people still thought that maybe they bought the house with the intention to live there and realized after that like they really couldn't afford it and regretted it, or that, which is even worse, that they knew from the beginning that they couldn't, and they bought the house with the plans of suing the prior owners the whole time, and it just didn't work out the way they wanted. Now, one thing that kind of makes me go, when it comes to the theory that the Broadduses did this to themselves, which initially, before I read this particular part, like through my entire research, I was like, absolutely not. Like I didn't believe at all that they could be involved in any capacity, because it just didn't sound right to me. It doesn't ring true to me based on who they are as people and who they seem to be as people. Again, we don't know anybody. But this is the one thing that made me go, And that is that Derek admitted that 3 years after the whole ordeal happened in the first place, he sent some letters himself. Not watcher letters, but anonymous letters. Well, not anonymous, but letters that weren't signed from Derek, to neighbors who had given him a particularly hard time during the whole ordeal. One of the people that he sent a letter to had put like a public post on Facebook that said, quote, I wish we could go back to the days of tar and feathers. I have just the couple in mind. He, I guess, sent these letters on Christmas Eve of 2017, and he said in them, among other things, that these people were domestic terrorists and that they had unchecked mental illnesses. And he signed these letters, not Derek, but friends of the Broaddus family. But he admitted later that this was actually him. So that I think is a little bit weird, that he was compelled to send anonymous letters. Maybe he was just inspired because he knows how terrifying they can be. But I thought that that was a little bit strange. And somebody who received one of the letters said that like the writing style was very poetic and similar to the Watcher's style of letter writing. I mean, how would they know? Except for what was like released in the complaint, I don't really know, but I just thought it was a little bit strange. Now, I don't know if these people meant to give the Broadduses a hard time, or if it's just that they didn't believe that the Watcher was real, because that was the vibe. They thought it was bullshit. They really did. And Derek said of this mindset that it wasn't true, and I quote, "There's a natural tendency to say, I've lived here for 35 years. Nothing's happened to me. What happened to my family is an affront to their contention that they're safe, that there's no such thing as mental illness in their community. People don't want to believe that this could happen in Westfield." But Westfield didn't exactly have like a spotless record. Yes, it's a safe place, it's a nice place to live, but horrible things happen everywhere, and horrible things had happened here before as well. Like, do you remember my video on John List? John List, the man who killed his wife, his kids, his mother, and then like put the weird religious music on and then ran off and started a new life. If you haven't seen that video, you should watch it. It's a very interesting case. It's one of those ones that really got me interested in true crime back in the day, and I have a video on it. You can watch it. But this happened in Westfield, okay? And it just happened a couple of years before Maria was born. So, like, things happened there. And they happened by people you would least expect to do them. Anyways, after some time, it seemed like things were settling down. Like, the sensationalism had gone down, and by the end of 2014, they really didn't have any leads anymore, right? It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, because the letters could have came from anywhere in northern New Jersey. So it finally seemed like things were getting better. I mean, things always get bad before they get better, right? So though the Watcher House drama stopped, they still had their other things going on in their life. Like, they left the house. They had to eventually leave Maria's parents' house, and they went and stayed with a friend at they went and stayed in a friend's beach house. And the friend who owned the beach house that they were staying in ended up having like a grand mal seizure. And then after that, Maria's, I think, father had a heart attack. So they had other shit going on top of all the drama of the house. Excuse me, it was her grandfather, not her father. But basically my point is that, like, it didn't seem like these people could get a fucking break. I mean, I guess the person who had the grand mal seizure had it worse, and the grandfather had it worse than they did because that was actually happening to them, not just next to them, but you know what I mean. But time moved on, things changed, and eventually the Broadduses were able to borrow some money from a friend, and they were able to buy a new home, and they bought it under an LLC so nobody would know where the fuck they lived because they were like, not wanting to deal with the stalker again. And eventually, since the sensationalism had gone down a little bit and there had been a lot of time with no letters, they were able to rent the house out. They rented the house out to a couple with like some big dogs who felt comfortable like rolling the dice and seeing what happened, but they did make sure to put like a clause in their lease where if a watcher letter came, they could get out of the lease and just move without having any repercussions, because generally if you break a lease early, there are some problems. And here's where the story picks back up again, because it didn't take long for another letter to come once a renter was in the house. 2 weeks after the renter moved in, Derek went to the property to work on like the roof. I guess some squirrels had like taken up residence and were like, we live here now too. And he was going to take care of that. And when he arrived, the new tenant handed him a letter that had just arrived. And it was a letter that was addressed to Derek and Maria. And this one threatened their lives. Violent winds and bitter cold to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria. You wonder who the watcher is. Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. I walked by the news trucks when they took over my neighborhood and mocked me. I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher. Bro, like, get a hobby. It had been 2.5 years since the Watcher first appeared to the time that this letter came. 2.5 years. And they had gone all this time without even getting a letter. And as soon as they get a tenant, within 2 weeks, there's another letter coming in. This had to be somebody close by. Like, somebody had to have still been watching after all this time. Like, that's crazy. So 4 letters. That's how many letters the Broaddus family received from the Watcher. And to this day, those letters haven't been seen. I mean, they haven't been like publicly published, right? Like people have seen them, people have read them. The information we have like for videos and things like that is from the criminal complaint. Those are the bits that were included in there are what are public records. So that's how we know. But 4 letters. A person harassed a family out of their home. And to this day, this case is unsolved. This like traumatized the Broaddus family, right? Like they received so many media requests. They received like 300 media requests because people just wanted to talk to them about it. They wanted to know their side of the story. They wanted to hear all about it. But Derek and Maria just tried to avoid it as long as they could and try to keep their family out of the spotlight because what happened to them, traumatized their kids, and they were just trying to move past it. I can't imagine that kind of trauma. I can't imagine your kids being put through that kind of trauma. Like they tried to avoid telling their kids what happened for a long time, but eventually they had to tell them why they couldn't move into their nice big house with all the chimneys for Santa to choose to go down. You know what I mean? And Derek said he sat his kids down and told them about what happened and that they were like, why does this Watcher hate us so much? And he had to explain to a 5-year-old that your house, your home, your town isn't as safe as you think it is. Anyways, in July of 2019, they were finally able to leave this all behind, as much as possible, that is, when they were able to sell the home, but at a pretty massive loss. They ended up selling it for about $400,000 less than they had purchased it for. The new owners of the home haven't been identified, and they haven't spoke out as to if they've received any letters from the Watcher. But I don't know if they will. No other family ever reported receiving any letters like that, except for the one that the Woods got, and other people who had lived in the house came out later and said that growing up there was great. It was a great place to live, surrounded by great neighbors. And now the Watcher is just one of those creepy things you talk about in the dark or around Halloween, right? I guess in 2018, October of 2018, the Watcher was ranked above even the Jersey Devil as like the top urban legend in New Jersey. Like that's how much traction this whole situation got. And to the Broaddus family, this isn't an urban legend. This is something that actually happened to them. This is a person who actually tormented them. And Derek said specifically, and I quote, "There is a mentally unhinged lunatic in that neighborhood." An unhinged lunatic who is still out there because, again, to this day, they've never been caught. There are lots of theories on who it might have been, from a neighbor, a real estate agent, somebody just pulling a prank, or like my least favorite of all theories, and that is somebody who is living inside the walls of 657 Boulevard. To which I say, no, 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 no. But who is it? We don't know. Police did their extensive investigation, and this person's identity was never revealed. And in their mind, because of that, they won, which is illustrated in their final letter to the Broadduses, where they said, quote, "The Watcher won." And with that statement, that, my friends, is the story of the Watcher House. What do you think? Isn't that fucking crazy? I truly cannot imagine being involved in something like that. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you call something as big as purchasing an over $1 million home a loss? The stress alone of purchasing that home would end me. I am not one who deals with conflict management, my emotions regarding conflict well. You know what I mean? And then the idea of these people doing it to themselves, I just don't know what I think about that. Derek writing those anonymous letters to his neighbors does make me go like, But then I look, he has like a public Twitter, and I go and look, and like the type of person that he seems to be just doesn't line up with a person who would do this themselves. He shares tweets about stalkers, cold cases, child safety, and even like current events, things like that. He posted about JonBenet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey, and his bid to try to get the DNA tested in a private lab. And he also posted about, apparently Harry Styles had like a stalker recently, which I didn't know about. Posted about that. He posts relatively often, and it's always about like new cases and developments and things like that. So it seems like the type of thing that he's passionate about. And it seems like the type of thing you would become passionate about when you've gone through something that made you a victim yourself, right? So I don't know. It's just like a really crazy story. It doesn't even sound real, you know what I mean? It sounds like the type of thing, it sounds like a movie, which is probably why we're getting a mini-series about it on Netflix. At the time I'm filming this, it hasn't come out yet, but Netflix apparently has created a series based on The Watcher. And I guess there was like a bidding war for the rights on the story, like Lifetime took a stab at it and it wasn't successful, but everyone was like, this story is so wild, that there were like 6 networks fighting over it, which is like something to know, I guess. And Netflix ended up winning, and I guess they spent like 7 figures on the rights to the story. And I want to know who gets that. It's like, do the Broadduses get that money? Do they get that money? Anyways, the series, they've only released, like at the time that I'm filming this, they've only released one thing, and it's like a teaser, and I guess like Stifler's mom plays a real estate agent, and I just thought that that would be very interesting. It seems like they're taking kind of a comedic approach, which is something. I mean, they bought the rights, I guess they can do whatever they want. And something that's fun, it's like a fun fact for you. Do you remember forever ago I did a collaboration? So one like collaboration I did with another true crime channel back when I first started on my Richard Ramirez video. It was a channel called Mystery Avalanche. They are no longer a channel anymore. They got rid of their channel. It doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, it was a husband and a wife, where one week the husband would do a video on a case, the next week the wife would do a video on a case, they go back and forth. Well, apparently the husband from Mystery Avalanche, he works with something regarding TV, and he actually worked on this Watcher series, and I thought that was something to know, because I still like follow them on Instagram and stuff, so I thought that was something to know. So you should watch that when it comes out and support them. I guess the guy who is making it, I don't know if they get supported by it, but you know what I mean, it's just something to know. I guess the guy who made it is Ryan Murphy also, which is the same guy who did the Dahmer series and also The People versus O.J. Simpson, so that's something to know. So yeah, don't forget to let me know down below if you watch it, and let me know what you think of it, right? I might watch it. I don't know. I never have time to watch anything because I have a baby and work at home full time, so I don't know if I'll get a chance to watch it, but let me know if you do and if you like it. Now that I have told you all the things, given you all the information, you have everything you need to know to make a decision, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Who do you think was the Watcher of 657 Boulevard, and what do you think their motive was for stalking the Broaddus family? But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for remembering the Broaddus family with me today. Please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is linked down below for your convenience, along with a link to my merch store and also a link to my membership in case you want to join. You get things like early access to videos, polls, lives, things like that. Also, before you leave, please don't forget to let me know what cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, or if you don't know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put your suggestion on the list, I put your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you're into because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe, be a better person than you were yesterday, and have a happy Halloween, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.